Hi, here we go for 3.2. And this is a quickie on priming. We've already talked about priming, but I want to kind of bring priming back as a topic as it relates to our exposure to stimuli in the environment as it links to categorization and stereotyping. So what do we know about priming then? And I'm going to offer you some of my own personal definitions, kind of based on the work I've done in this area. Priming is the effect of a stimulus on perception. It could be the effect on cognition, behavior, emotion, and probably broader than that. We encounter countless stimuli throughout our day. William James described our existence as a blooming, buzzing confusion. And it's largely the non-conscious that selects things to which we should attend and other things which it'll process non-consciously, but not push into our conscious perception. We encounter these countless stimuli that can be external or internal. And I think this is an important point because external stimuli, right, we have here Penelope is an external stimuli and she evokes certain cognitive and emotional consequences. But then we can also have a thought pop to mind, and when that thought pops to mind, it can also prime countless associations in and of itself. So internal or external. External situational largely employ temporary features of our environment. The internal dispositional are often described as chronic states and might represent chronic attitudes. So I might, when I see cats, I'm chronically primed to have a positive association with cats, but that's kind of a dispositional attribute that's something I've learned over time rather than something that's inherent in the external stimulus. So we operate via both of these areas, right? Now priming works through associations or works resulting in associations, both. Be a temporary or chronic stimulus, the stimulus increases the accessibility, term we've used before, of associated stimuli. So if I see a cat, then it brings to mind all the items that I have associated with cats. It can bring to mind beliefs, belief systems. It can evoke memories, emotional responses. So for example, seeing a dog is likely to remind me of my dear departed dog, Digby. So I'm on Twitter, and some people posted pictures of their dog, and the dog's in the kitchen looking up at you, and I'm looking at the picture, and I see a dog looking up at me with those big brown eyes, and I'm like, Digby used to do that. And then I remember that Digby died last year. It's been about a year now, almost getting to be. And how much I miss his presence, right? And then I become at least momentarily sad, nostalgic, whatever emotion label we might want to put on that. And that would be different for all of us, right? So note that one dog, right, and I categorize, so I look at the stimulus object, that's a dog, so I put it in the dog category, and now it facilitates all these associations in my dog category. It brings to mind all these things. Now the benefit to this is, as human beings, we can respond pretty damn quickly, because that is, I notice a stimuli object, if it's familiar to me, right, I categorize it, and then I associate it. So if I see a rock hurtling at me, I say, wow, thrown object hurtling at me, pain, and then I might duck. Now some of that might be reflex, but it might be responses to other objects that are learned as well. Right? So remember that categories facilitate associations. That's the big thing that we need to take away from this. An effective stimulus triggers a potential cascade of associations that can present themselves as memories. And how these systems are tied together is a fascinating area of explanation. And that's why I really think we're in the era of neuroscience, because we need to understand this. This is where we're at. How is this stuff represented in the brain, and how does the physical biological process of the brain make all this happen? That to me is the mind-blowing area to explore now. Behaviors, emotions, evaluations can be triggered as well. So it's not just memories, but all these components. Now when we talk about memories, let's consider, for example, a song that comes on the radio channel, the streaming service you use, if you're ancient, maybe a CD that you put. I know, that's so funny. Let's say the song is associated with a past relationship. Maybe you have a breakup song, a song that you listened to when you had an intense relationship and you broke up, right? Memories and feelings associated with that relationship come flooding back into consciousness. And Marcel Proust told us about this. He wrote this book called Remembrances of Things Past, and Proust's description, and there's another book that contemporary book. Proust was, writing 100 years ago, but there's a contemporary book that says Proust is a neuroscientist, and there's a lot to that because Proust was a great student of memory, and but he was a literary guy, not a psychologist necessarily. So Marcel Proust's description of entering a home, and he makes this so real in the book. He says, I entered the home, and the smell pervaded my senses, right? And he said the familiar cooking smell. He goes on to describe a flood of memories from the smell to his grandmother's kitchen to her appearance in minute detail, even describing her hand at the stove and, that kind of transparent paper-thin skin that the elderly, can develop into, and just the tremendous richness of detail that occurred from a smell. And it's interesting, from a sensation and perception, smell is often a tremendous, odor stimuli, often tremendous power in evoking memory and associations. The sense of smell, the olfactory sense, and taste is a hugely ancient part of our brain, right? One of the older areas of our brain, and has a tremendous amount of power to activate memories that would be thought to reside largely in the hippocampus. And notice that the limbic system and the olfactory system are very close and have a rich set of connections. Again, back to the physical structure of the brain and how it affects our experience of our life. So if we consider stereotypes then, as I said, stereotypes are person categories. We encounter the person, categorize the person, and this is largely done automatically and unconsciously. Hence, it saves cognitive resources. We, the cognitive misers, activates the stereotype. And then the stereotype content is applied to the person and affects our perception of the person, their action. If we're wondering about their motivation, it might send us down a path to this is the most likely motivation based on the stereotype of the people in this category to whom I assign this individual. Right? And then it can affect our reaction to the same. So the power of priming then, whether it's in the lab or the natural environment, and once we discovered how to use priming in the lab, we could study how people stereotype and what the effects are quite readily, right? That's the beauty of learning about priming as a laboratory technique, very potent in that regard. But it can be the natural environment as well. Stimuli first affect us largely outside of our awareness. That's where this process begins, and then conscious processing follows. Sometimes, but and that's the problem. We would hope that conscious processing follows all the time, but not necessarily. It will become conscious. If we become conscious of the prime's effect, we can correct it. And this is the beauty of living mindfully. We say, oh my God, this stereotype exists, which was generated for me, largely in my relationship to my culture. Don't beat yourself up for the stereotypes you hold. You can beat yourself up when you behave poorly on the basis of stereotypic thinking. You have the option to stop it, and that's what I'm talking about here. Stereotypes are largely automatic, and they're largely learned from culture. That's just part of our cultural heritage. But what we do as a result of having stereotypes activated is purely within our purview. That's where we have the power, right? So if we become conscious of the prime's effect, as I've been talking earlier in earlier modules, we can correct for it. And remember Wilson and Brecky and the correction process? But what are the two elements necessary for correction? You got to be able to repeat these over and over again as a legacy, as a gift from taking this class. You got them? You know it. When we're motivated and when we're able. So if you have the motivation to correct for this bias, this prejudice, whatever is occurring, right? If we're motivated and we have the ability to do so. If we remain unaware, though, as we saw in the Wilson and Brecky model, correction is likely not possible. So let's take this into discussion board 6. Ask you to be mindful in your world in order to detect a stimuli and effect. So now we're going to go out into our world as we do, right? But we're going to try to be a little less cognitively miserly, and we're going to hopefully embrace Ellen Langer and try to become a little more mindful about our existence. Say, wow, there's a stimuli, and wow, look how that shit affected me, right? And then you begin to come from the point of choice. It's like, well, I understand it's an automatic response. Do I want to it to affect me this way, or do I not want to have it? And as I'm preparing Psych of Adjustment for the fall, and I'm really getting into the existential kind of psychology, choice is all important, right? Choice is our freedom, and choice is the result of freedom, and choice is the expression of our freedom. So do I choose to respond in my stereotypic fashion, or do I choose to respond in a more conscious, mindful way? Right? So the real work, though, is in noticing the stimuli and linking it to the response. Right? Hopefully this increases your ability to be more mindful about your environment and come from a point of choice in your responses. And this implies a choice of further perception, choice of emotional response, choice of activated attitude to buy into it or not. This is about genuine psychological freedom and not being imprisoned by the non-conscious and the structure of our categories. Right? That is, we can use categories but not necessarily be mastered by our categories. Right? Be the slaves to our categories. Have the cognitive flexibility that results from mindfulness and choice. So that's discussion board 6, right? And you can look at that. And then assignment 7, once we become aware, we've increased our power to be in our world, which is a very existential comment. That is, well, of course I'm in my world. Consciously or non-consciously, and to what extent? What's your ratio? So to become mindful, to be in your world as a chooser rather than as a consequence, so to speak. We've increased our power to be in the world, and that's become increasingly authentic. That is, be who we are through choosing the nature of our existence. In this assignment, let us consider how we might change at least our behavior, cognition, emotions by manipulating our environment. So we manipulate our environment because we know that our environment has the power to cause us to behave in certain ways. So with that in mind, say, wow, if I want to eat less, if I want to go onto a diet, then one of the things that would probably benefit me is not to bring food that I can't resist into the house. Right? So I change the environment within my house. I change the way I do business in that regard. So that is beginning to take control over my associations, my behavior, my attitudes, and my emotional states. So manipulating the environment because we become aware of how the environment affects us. And that's it. Let's go totally mindful on this. Let's make Ellen Langer proud, right? So, and welcome to Existential Psychology. And again, you know, I'm a shameless self-promoter. There's still room in Psychology of Adjustment. So if you're interested, we're going to be talking about this stuff big time. It's going to be tough. It's going to be a real tough lead into fall semester because essentially I have to turn all these in-person classes into online classes, and it's vastly different. And I could sit here and feel the victim in having to do that. Damn COVID, damn the university, damn all this other stuff. But you know what? I'm going to choose to do my best job, and I'm going to choose to make a go of it. And through this, I'm going to become in touch with my abilities to do this, and I'm going to become more authentic as your instructor. So we can spin this shit, and we can adapt, we can adjust. We've been dealt a shitty hand, but I'm going to choose to play that hand. Right? I'm not going to throw my hands up and give in. I'm going to choose to redouble my effort and do so even better. All right? And as we wind up, I just want to remind you of Barge, Ullman, etc. And this was the book that really kind of triggered this idea of embracing the new unconscious, which meant not the Freudian unconscious, but the new social psychological unconscious. And of course, I've also told you that some of us choose to call it the non-conscious, me being one of those. So thanks a lot, guys. 3.2 under our belt. Ever onward, as my boss, Chuck Remsing, used to say. And it used to scare me when he said that, but I learned a lot from the man, and ever onward.